Any thoughts on the Ohio train derailment and the other hazardous spills that followed that event? Thank you both and much love. And so specifically the Discord question framing was, what are the evolutionary and ecological impacts of the Ohio train derailment and burn of the chemicals on the surrounding environment?
So, completely horrifying and inevitable. Right? You're talking about some basic compounds involved in industrial processes in such large volumes that we are transporting these things in the open every day. And train derailments happen because trains are mechanisms and tracks are long and weather occurs and nothing's perfect.
Yep.
In this particular case, there's this very dramatic video, which you may have seen from a CCTV camera, where one of the cars on the train that derailed was sparking miles before it got...
Like at the wheel or the track?
Yeah, so
on the
apparently
track?
what happened, you can imagine you've got a train with 100 cars, each of which has several axles.
Sure.
Some axle runs out of grease or a bearing breaks, and so something's rubbing that shouldn't be rubbing, and it heats up and gets red hot.
There's no one anywhere near it because it's a long
Some train passes through the night, and the only people manning the thing are up front.
That's what I meant. I didn't mean people outside.
Right.
Like on the train, there's only people up front, presumably.
Apparently there are detectors, right? This is a common enough problem.
Electronic detectors.
Electronic detectors that mount near the tracks that are like, oh, wait, that wheel was hot.
Oh, okay.
You've got a problem. They send a signal.
Okay.
So
part of the train or part of the tracks?
I think it's part of the track infrastructure.
Okay.
But anyway, in this case, the whatever system it is didn't work. Thing derails.
Which will happen, like as you said. Yeah.
Then really weird shit happens. News blackout. We don't hear about this thing until already we're at the point of them having chosen to set it ablaze.
Yeah.
All of which is bad. You know, the vinyl chloride, apparently, you forgive me if my chemistry's off here, but you burn this basically, this constituent of plastics, this chlorinated constituent of plastics, you burn it, and one of the common products is phosgene, which is literally a chemical warfare agent used in World War I think.
Fun.
But here's the you've got the inevitable part, you've got the industrial part where it's like, oh, you're using huge amounts of this stuff that's built out of very, very toxic constituent molecules, and you've lost control of it. Totally inevitable that will happen somewhere, right? And then you didn't have a good plan for what to do about it. Well, that wasn't inevitable, right? In fact, given that it was inevitable you were going to spill this stuff, there should have been a, team that you could have anywhere in the country within 6 hours that has the right equipment to basically limit the spread of this. I don't know what it would look like, but you would want to take all of the stuff that's recoverable and you would want to recover it into something that would then allow you to neutralize it chemically, which didn't happen, right? You've got some local fire department, scratching its head, reading up on what was on this train and what's now been spilled onto the ground and what the dangers are. You've got what I suspect was a psyop in which all of the semi-sophisticated people were led to focus on this term BLEVE, right, which is a kind of explosion that you risk when you have a pressurized liquid and you have an accident, right? It can cause these very powerful explosions. So yes, you would, if you were on the ground, you would be worried about this possibility with these cars all topsy-turvy having derailed. But the point is, the fact that people could look that up and then start feeling sophisticated for saying it caused them to kind of miss what I suspect is the story here, which is, game theoretically, there will be repeatedly incidents where some industrial thing has happened. The right thing to do to minimize the amount of harm to human beings is X. But there's some other thing to do that minimizes the legal liability while increasing the harm to humans, right? So one thing that is true is by lighting this stuff on fire, they have distributed, I think they've probably greatly increased the number of cancers and other pathologies that people will get from the same volume of spilled liquid. but
Yeah,
they've
I think
distributed
that's
it.
part of the evolutionary and ecological answer. Yeah.
They've distributed it over a much bigger area, which means that it will be much harder to find. In other words, if you had a sky-high cancer rate in Palestine, Ohio, then the answer is, oh yeah, it was that spill.
There's no 3 Mile Island.
Right. And so,
It's
so I believe
dispersed, as you say.
the question is, you always will have industry looking for a mechanism once it has caused its own legal liability to distribute the harms so that they are harder to spot and prove. And I believe that there are several examples of this that we've seen in recent history. One of them being the Deepwater Horizon accident, where you will recall there was a chemical that none of us had heard of until the accident called Corexit, that the oil companies had...
This is long before Brexit.
Yeah. Okay. They had stored this chemical. So somehow the industry had been sold this chemical that would deal in some way with a oil spill on
it just
water.
dispersed it all into little tiny droplets in the Gulf of Mexico.
It emulsified it, sank the oil. So in some ways, the disaster was less horrible than it might be because you didn't have as many pictures of greasy birds.
But it's still like the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. Like, I don't know how deep it is there, but like the abyssal zone or whatever is just coated in
You can be pretty damn sure
now.
what they didn't do is figure out that the net harm was lower for using this thing. What they
Right.
found out was, hey, actually, we can sink your oil for you, and then the lawsuits you'll face will be a fraction of what you'd face otherwise. Okay, well, here we are in the public suffering whatever harms that is.
Yeah.
How's your shellfish from the Gulf of Mexico tasting, right? And then there's another case where during the Fukushima cleanup, the Japanese government played a couple of different games. One game was it had a standard for how much radioactivity meant you couldn't burn waste, right? Very reasonable standard to have. Now, this is not chemical contamination. This is radioactive particles that are not in any way rendered less radioactive by burning them. They're just dispersed.
right.
So what the Japanese government did was it added material to waste that was too radioactive to burn in order to get it below the standard that would then allow them to burn it, which is insane. All that
And
does...
it went up, and then which way are the winds going? Did we get it on the west coast of the U.S. or did it go into Asia? Where'd
They
it go?
trucked it around Japan, as I recall.
No, but the
plume,
burn, yeah.
right. It went everywhere. I don't know whether that plume reached us. Lots of stuff from Fukushima did reach us here on the West Coast, especially the Pacific Northwest. But the trucking of the material around Japan means that the provability of the harms will go down later. This is the original. You and I talked at one point on an early live stream about monkeying with the baseline.
Yeah.
And the idea was this will drive up the baseline of cancers elsewhere, making whatever increase happens in Fukushima prefecture that much harder to see because the background elsewhere is artificially elevated. Yeah.
It's not dumb.
It's not a lack of cleverness on their part.
No.
But anyway, so what I would say is I fear that what happened in Palestine, Ohio is the result of business having gotten wise to the fact that one way to deal with its liability problem is to distribute the harms over a larger population so they're harder to prove.